How you doing? Duckfilms here, and today we have yet another tier list video. And if you don't know me or anything about this, I'm a tournament player. I used to play Deadlock all the time when the game first came out to early access, and I used to coach your Marvel rivals and still play it at the top. Whether some of my takes are good or not, well, that's just up to you. All tier lists are biased, so it can be good or bad, doesn't really matter. If you like this type of content or want to see more, make sure to hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. But without further ado, let's get started. So just ahead, going left to right in order, we start with none other than Abrams. Now with Abrams, I think he's a really solid character right now. He's not overpowered as he recently got a little bit of a nerf, but he's never going to be weak either. He's a rather tanky character with a lot of durability and a lot of crowd control ability. I don't think he's at a place where he's extremely strong or extremely weak. He's kind of just sitting in the middle. He's honestly a super strong version of a hero that's still fair. So I think that being said, I think he sits around the B tier because, again, he's not super strong, but he's not super weak. He's just in the middle. Moving on, we come to Apollo. I don't know why my tier list kind of got moved around. But with Apollo, his lane phase is insanely strong, if you know. Usually he will get out with a couple kills out of the laning phase just because the sheer amount of damage he does. But laning phase doesn't necessarily always decide the game's fate because there's a lot of momentum with the rest of the game. He's impactful enough that it still matters though, because his second ability is honestly one of the best in the entire game, that is the Repulse. And trying to kill a good Apollo is honestly a nightmare. You need multiple tools stacked together, different types of crowd control. And honestly, you're never necessarily unhappy if you have your Apollo on your team because he can just do a lot. I think he did recently get nerfed, so he isn't as S tier as he used to be, but I think he still sits at A tier. Again, in my eyes, every single character in this game is super viable and can easily carry certain games. It just depends on how the game goes. It's just what I think in terms of the power ranking. But moving on to Bebop, again, trying to stay in order. So Bebop. Gun Bebop is extremely strong right now. I don't think he's necessarily a S tier pick or anything, but I think he's still a definite nuisance. He brings a lot of crowd control, lockdown potential, and consistent damage. He's just shouldn't be overhyped because he is, or he has a good way to be shut down a lot of the time. But I think he still sits around the top tier picks. I think A is a solid spot for him. Now, moving on to Billy. Now, Billy is another one of those characters like Abrams where he's a tank. That's really about it. He doesn't necessarily stand out in terms of damage or anything like that. You're never loading into a match thinking they picked Billy, we're doomed, or anything of the sorts, because at the end of the day, he's a decent frontliner, does a lot of damage, and honestly, he's super consistent, super reliable, but not necessarily game defying. If you have a really good Billy on your team, it's not going to make the biggest difference in the world, but it is nice to have. He's a really good initiator and frontline brawler. So I think he sits around the B tier, kind of on the same track as Abrams, not over the top or crazy or anything like that, and just not super good. But moving on to Calico. So Calico is an interesting character. With all the HP increases as of recent, this character kind of struggles, I feel, because even though she might be super strong in the very beginning of the early game and doing a ton of early game roaming, she still falls off quite drastically in my eyes. I think she's successful to a lot of different things and can be a nightmare to, just be put down. I think she sits somewhere at the lower tiers. Again, I still think the character can carry perfectly fine, but I think there is a lot of ways to shut her down if the Calico isn't extremely good at the character and understanding of what's going on. Now, Celeste. Celeste is a little bit interesting because she isn't necessarily amazing as she once was, but she isn't terrible. I think the character is insane because of her movement, for the most part, because if you're playing against a team that doesn't know anything about the character, you're going to struggle. If you don't understand that you need to lock her down, you have to be predicting roams. You're going to have to be predicting that she's going to be the one running the urn, being a nuisance, and you just need to learn how to spread out if you're playing against her ultimate. I think she sits around the mid tier. Like, she is mediocre. She's not insanely strong. She's not insanely weak. So I think B tier for this character of Celeste is fine. Moving on to Doorman. I hate Doorman. I think a lot of players hate Doorman. The character is rather annoying. Yes, you can counter his cart now with the spell magic, but even then, that isn't always the best case scenario when trying to deal with this character. He takes you with a walker, he takes you into the base, he ults you, he does whatever he can to be an absolute menace. He has a ton of damage output. His utility lets you take risks safely, and he creates constant pressure across the map because of the doorway, which is really annoying. So I don't think this character is necessarily a character that is game breaking and just completely ruins everything. But I don't think he's a character that is horrible either. I think he sits around the A tier as well. And yeah, that's kind of like what I'm sitting at with Doorman. Moving on to Drifter. So Drifter used to be weak, and then I think with the recent buffs is definitely a lot stronger now. I think he's a pretty good character. I enjoy playing him. I still think he does a lot of damage. A lot of people will argue that he doesn't do as much damage as he used to, but I still think he's a really solid pick. I'm actually gonna put him around like C tier, maybe C B tier, maybe B tier. B tier is fine. Dynamo. So Dynamo is another interesting character. I think he is S tier. He's one of those characters that just has everything you can imagine. He has a AoE cleanse with his quantum entanglement. He has a decent amount of damage with his wave, or whatever you want to call it. Then he has his area of healing, and he has his black hole. Now, basically, his abilities just make him super consistent, super strong. Like, basically, a lot of the M1 characters are dominated right now, and I think he forces enemies to adapt or just shuts them down outright. And he's one of the most impactful heroes you can have on a team right now. That and Lash, I would say, but I think Dynamo is somewhere sitting around the S tier. So Graves. Now Graves, she just got a ton of nerfs, and I just don't think she's really that good. So I think Graves for me personally, so it's like D tier. Personally, I think that's kind of what we're looking at. Now, moving on to Great Talon, aka the Babushka. Even though he is a man, I say it as a joke. Now, Great Talon, honestly, I just feel like is good. He's rather consistent. He does a lot of damage, and because of his ultimate, the execution ultimate, people will tend to put him lower because he's easy to dive on and easy to deal with for the most part. But I think with his ultimate and his spirit scaling, the plus 10 stacks, as we all know, I think if he gets ahead early, he can easily dominate a game. The issue is, if Great Talon gets behind in lane, or just gets behind in the game in general, it just feels miserable. Playing this character behind is just an awful experience because you just don't feel like you do any damage or have any impact, and you just feel like you blow up to enemies instantly. I think, honestly, he sits around the A tier because of his ultimate. Purely because of that, for the most part. Haze. So Haze got a lot of changes than what I previously talked about. She went from a ult bot, or playing for your ultimate, into a isolation character suited for 1v1s and playing for picks with her sleep dagger, depending on how you're building, typically gun. But I don't think this character is good anymore, precisely. I think she sits around the C tier for the most part. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking at. Moving on to Holiday. So Holiday is, I think, better than what most people would think. A lot of people think she's completely useless. I, for one, don't think any character in this game is useless. I think each character has its niche, and this character still is good at the early stages of the laning phase, where you're trying to kidnap, you're trying to do a lot of poke damage. You get that one guaranteed pick with her lasso, so it can be useful in a lot of different scenarios. However, I think she just falls off really hard because there's a lot of ways to counter her. Gun Holiday, super strong, super fun to play, and probably the better way to play. She isn't the worst pick. She isn't the best pick. I think she sits around CB. The same with Haze, but I think she has potential to be B or even higher in the right hands of whoever's playing the character. Moving on to Infernus and then into Ivy. So Infernus, S tier. This character is running rampant right now through every single elo, no matter what you choose. Whether it's gun Infernus or if you're playing the dash build. The dash build is usually the better option because of just the sheer amount of damage you do and just how much you can escape with. I think the character is useful in a lot of scenarios. Ton of strong laning pressure, ton of strong sides, strong team fight, hard to punish. Pretty much the character is invincible for the most part. And if you pair Dynamo with Infernus, it seems like the team that has those two characters is always the one coming out on top. So I think putting them in the S tier is perfectly fine. Moving on to Ivy. Now, honestly, Ivy is extremely valuable just because I feel like rotating around the map with the high mobility with her ultimate is extremely strong. The tether, because M1s are such a high priority pick right now, I think having healing tempo with her tether of her 2 maxed out is extremely impactful because you always have that amplified damage 24/7. I think Ivy sits around A tier. She could be S in a more organized play, but I think A tier is a perfect fit. Now, Kelvin. Kelvin, I think he's probably the best support in the game. Maybe on par with that of Dynamo if you classify Dynamo as a pseudo support in quotations. But I think Kelvin probably sits around the A tier. Good, decent healing and everything like that. Then moving on to Geist. Geist is super strong, but I think she gets overpowered by other M1 carries like Venator, maybe Warden, Wraith, Mina, even. I think Geist is probably A. I think that's fine. Lash, I'm a big advocate for Lash. I love Lash. He's really fun to play. He's a really good way to be super high impactful while moving around the map constantly. Kind of this on the same part of Holiday, while you're constantly moving around the map, using your ult to get guaranteed picks. But the difference is he gets multiple, she gets one. So Lash, I would always take a Lash over a Holiday, and I think he's just way too good enough to not miss out on. And I think we're sitting around the A tier with him, personally. McGinnis. I don't think McGinnis is good at all. I wouldn't mind if she got reworked or anything like that. I think she sits around like C, D tier, maybe D. I don't know. She's just not fun. Moving on to Mina. Mina is S. The character is honestly so strong. Insane mobility, huge damage, high survivability, and strong at pretty much every stage of the game. And because of the health changes, her rake just does an insane amount of self-healing. And I think S tier personally. Now, moving on to Mirage. Mirage got a lot of changes recently in the recent patch with, he originally was buffed to where he was basically permabanned or, the character you hated the most. Wyoming, he was coming for you whether or not. But now he did receive some nerfs, but I still think he's in a super inflated state. And I mean that he still does a crazy amount of damage. He has a huge impact in the game, mainly because he can just TP around the map and just farm consistently and constantly. Like, I think you could argue between S and A, maybe at the very top of A and at the very bottom of S right now, because I think this character is overshadowed by like Venator, by Mina, by I guess you could even say like Viper Warden in my eyes as well. But I think we'll put him for S just for this video's sake. Then moving on to Muhammad and Kareem. So Mo and Krill, they feel pretty consistent, pretty balanced, honestly. Like we all hate them. We hate this pair. Like you can't deny it. But I think they are very good still. I think in like A, maybe B. Like pick characters are very good right now. Probably B. Or maybe A, that's fine. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Then Paige. So Paige is underrated, honestly. I think she's pretty good. Like she has a lot of utility. One of the biggest drawbacks though is that she has a lot of cooldown. She has a lot of downtime where you're just kind of throwing pages at people and not really doing anything. But I think she does amplify her team quite well with her ultimate, her shield, and her stun, her catch potential. She doesn't need a ton of farm to be super impactful, which is also a great benefit of Paige. But I think she sits around B. I think she's better than some of the other characters. But that's just my opinion. Moving on to Paradox. Paradox is rather balanced, honestly. I think it's just dependent on what you're trying to play in a team composition. She's still fine. She still has the ability to pull off a ton of picks, a ton of other issues in the game as well. But I think she sits around B tier in the middle. Moving on to Pocket. Now with Pocket, there's nothing wrong with him. Like he's definitely not super strong. Like Affliction is a nice thing to have, I guess, for your team because it just makes all the enemies still, not be able to get the healing they need and so on. But I think there's just better characters that does his job slightly better. For example, Infernus with the debuff with his afterburn. I think that is like undeniably the difference between the two. You have that character. I don't think he's bad or terrible or in any instance. I think he's like a low B tier if I went from left to right. Usually when I place characters on tier lists, I never talk about left to right because I honestly don't think that like a character could just be slightly better than the other in said tier list. But typically I just like to have all these characters I think are A, all these characters I think are B, and so on. But that's where I'm kind of thinking with Pocket. Then Rem, he kind of is the same thing as Ivy, but a little bit worse because he's just not as tanky and just blows up pretty easily. So I think he's like a low B tier in my eyes. Moving on to 7. 7 is, bottom of A tier probably. He just farms a lot. He's a stat checking. He has really, really good scaling. And I think the issue that keeps him from going S is that eventually he falls off when people understand what to do against his character. And once they get to that point, the character becomes extremely useless. Now moving on to Shiv. They did nerf his dash, but they buffed his knives. Knife build is super strong, super oppressive still. I think this character is still S tier. And I think this character will always remain in a super inflated state because it's always been a really weird character that has always felt strong, even since the first release. Since releasing this character, they've only nerfed him. They've never buffed him or done anything. They've only nerfed him and he still remains super strong, which is kind of crazy. Moving on to Silver. Now, Silver, I think, is still a really good character. I think she has high damage, high survivability, strong scaling. She has not that many weaknesses. She has a built-in disarm to her kit, which is kind of insane to me. And I think this character still remains S tier. Like, they nerfed her a few patches ago, and then in the 2 recent, patches that they have done, they buffed her again and made her super strong again. So I still think that's good. Okay, Sinclair. Now, Sinclair is very player dependent. In the right hands, he can feel strong. I think the big thing about this is when you look at Night Shift, you see a lot of pro teams pick up Sinclair. That's because there's a draft system in Night Shift or in a tournament setting. There's a draft system. If they pick Dynamo Kelvin, picking Sinclair for yourself is a good idea because you have those options to ultimates. When it's just normal matchmaking and just the normal game, you don't have that draft system. You don't get to choose who you're playing against on the enemy team. You don't get to know if they have a Dynamo, if they have a Lash, if they have a Kelvin. It's always a if with a question mark. So I think this character in my eyes sits at A, and I think it's really dependent on who you're playing against. If you're playing against a Dynamo, you're playing against a Kelvin, you're playing against an Infernus, then he's going to sit higher because he has better options with his ultimate. If not, he's just not as good, which is kind of the sad part. But anyways, moving on to Venator. Now, Venator is probably one of the best heroes in the game for, just carrying the game into the late game. He does a massive damage. He scales insanely well. He's super hard to punish for the most part if you know how to position well. And even when behind, he can easily take over the game because he can just consistently farm and just evaporate tier 3 camps. So I think it's S tier, no doubt. So Victor, I don't think Victor's that good. He's definitely better than what people make him out to be. It's just he can be super punished super easily. I think personally he sits C tier because I never see Victors do well anymore. Like previously, yeah, a little bit, but not anymore. Moving on to Vindicta. I think she's gotten power crept, and she's a character that has to snowball. You have to get picks with her ultimate to scale extremely well. So I think this character sits B tier for the most part. Now, Viscous. Now, I think Viscous is not good in normal MM, but when you look at it in a tournament setting, he looks like some of the best character because he has the cleansing with his cube. He has all of these other factors that just enable the character and the rest of his team extremely well. So like I said, in normal MM, not really good. I think probably C tier, but I would put him like arguably B tier as well. Normal MM, I think low, and organized play, definitely higher. Then moving on to Viper. I have always said Viper is extremely strong. No matter what, I think this character is insane. The interesting thing is you either get 2 different types of Viper players. They're either extremely insane, always super strong, always super fed, always pumping out damage. Or the opposite is the Viper has no idea what they're doing and you're just absolutely feeding. Difference is this character is just so strong that I think I have to put S. Okay. Moving on to Warden. I think Warden is good, but he's overshadowed by a lot of the other M1 carries. Uh, Mirage, Venator, Diced even. I think he said speed, but I think with certain bands, in theory, with certain bands and other aspects of the game, this character can get a lot more potential because of his silencing and just everything else this character has to offer with his kit. Then moving on to Wraith. I think Wraith is A because I think she is a good M1, but it's still better than like Warden, maybe even Geist for the most part, and still has a lot of potential. And then I think lastly, Yamato is solid overall for a frontliner, and it's still a very good pick. This is kind of what I'm thinking about the tier list as of right now. You guys can let me know in the comments down below what you guys think. I mean, everybody has their own opinions, which is perfectly fine. But like I said, I would love to hear what you guys have to think in the comments down below. But anyways, I hope you have a great and safe day, and I'll catch you in the next one.